Some fights don't end, but they're still worth fighting. Doctor Who Series 12 rolls on, and we have arrived at Can You Hear Me? I did something that I don't do very often, especially when I'm watching something that I'm trying to get the reviews out as it's airing, because I want to turn these things around relatively quickly. I watched this thing a second time before sitting down to talk about it, and I'm really glad I did. Vibe-wise, as far as an overall episode, it actually felt very reminiscent of It Takes You Away. It has this sort of odd approach to things, and you're not entirely sure where it's going or what it's playing at. And it's borderline surreal, and it reminds me a lot more of 1970s era sci-fi. Not even necessarily Doctor Who specifically, but, you know, things like A Wrinkle in Time and more of the kind of expansion of the mind style science fiction rather than the usual spaceships and lasers kind. And I like when Doctor Who dips into that. There is a lot that I really, really like about this episode. I think it does a good sense of giving you a sense of sort of a creeping threat. That there's, because initially, like, we don't know what's going on. Setup is straightforward enough at first, because we've got this woman in Aleppo. She has these fears. She's seeing things that nobody else sees. Oh, wait, look, they're real. So, okay, straightforward enough. But then, you know, the doctor brings everybody back to Sheffield, and they split for a bit, and people start having odd things go on. But they seem to be incredibly self-contained. They're less odd events than they are odd personal experiences. As Ryan goes back and talks to a friend who he's had for a long time, but he hasn't seen in a bit because of the complications of traveling with the doctor. And Yaz, you know, sits down for a dinner with her sister in a remembrance of something that we don't know right away, but there seems to be some baggage behind that. And then there's Graham, who gets this vision of this woman. And we don't know what any of this is, what it has to do with the woman in Aleppo, or anything. And I like the progression of it. I think this thing is very well paced. It does a very good job of laying out what it is that we need to know, but not doing it any earlier than we need to know it. So I enjoyed all of that. The whole vibe is not quite at the level of surreal, but just off-putting enough that you're like, I'm a little unsettled and I like it. Or at least that was my takeaway with it. So, the way things progressed from there was kind of why I really needed to watch this twice. So, the doctor encounters this guy, this ancient, bald, tattoo-headed guy who was haunting Ryan's friend and showed up as, you know, Yaz saw him. He seems to be orchestrating this thing. He seems to be whoever's capturing this woman that Graham saw. First off, I love that he's just straight up an immortal and something way more powerful than the doctor is. It's actually been a really long time since Doctor Who has acknowledged that the Time Lords were not the end-all, be-all of intelligent life in the universe in terms of achievements, power, whatever else. They just weren't. They didn't used to be at any rate. New Era Doctor Who has really kind of hammered that home, which contributes to the whole thing of the Doctor herself feeling like the most important thing in the universe. And part of that is caused by how much of a build-up the Time Lords themselves have had. You go back to Classic Era, the Time Lords, they're up there, but they're not running everything. They're upper middle class is what they are, but well above them are these insane immortal beings, a lot of whom get name dropped by this guy, which I loved. He mentions the Eternals, he mentions the Guardians, he mentions the Toy Maker. That just immediately warmed my heart, and I loved his attitude and just this, you're quite clever and all that, but not enough. You're just way less impressive than me. That's just a fact. And to have a guy have that vibe where it just feels like a natural fact. It's not arrogance. It's like it's a reality. He is more powerful than her. He is smarter than her. At least in terms of the initial setup and the trap that he lays for her, which is quite a good trap in terms of both how he laid it and what he was getting her to do. And I also dig the explanation that if he comes from another dimension, he can't unlock this prison because it's made from tech that just he can't work this stuff. And it especially feeds into, if all of his power and everything he does feeds into mental states and dreams and so that's, manipulations of emotional or mental states. It's not tech. He can't do anything about the tech, but the Doctor can. And so I liked that. And then we have the release of the other immortal. And initially, I remember thinking, first time I watched it, I found myself thinking, this is going to have to be a two-parter, isn't it? I mean, the Doctor's going to take on immortal beings. They're not going to wrap this up in the same episode. That would just completely undermine them. And yet, when it ended, I didn't quite feel that had been the case. And that was, again, another one of the reasons I needed to watch it again. And I needed to get a sense of what it was that made it work. Part of it is that the Doctor didn't create a way to defeat them from scratch. She adapts what had already been used to combat them. This prison, she gets them back into it. As opposed to, completely creating from scratch a way to defeat, effectively, gods. In the narrative, they're gods. Thematically, metaphorically, that's not what they are. They're depression. They are self-doubt. They are the voices in your head who torment you. This episode does a really good job of balancing the metaphor that is going on with a story that I think is interesting in and of itself. And even though I initially cited it takes you away in terms of the general vibe, I think the lasting impression that it gave me was something much closer to Vincent and the Doctor. I'm not sure it quite hits the same highs, at least in terms of the emotional landing of everything. But as far as integrating the metaphor of depression into the story, yeah, this is really good. And I always love when theming can be done as intelligently as this, because once you identify the theme of something, it begs a lot of questions. Well, if this represents that, then does this work? Does that work? And whether or not it's good theming, the answer will either be yes or no. So, for example, with this, once I hit on these two, the woman especially, because she just feeds on fear and bad dreams and, your nightmares, she, even more than him, is depression, is that isolation and everything that comes with it. And I found myself thinking, well, but the Doctor defeated them. Is that sending a bad message about depression, that you can just beat it, that you can just win? And then I'm like, no, that it doesn't, because she doesn't obliterate them. She doesn't, she doesn't render them completely ineffective. She doesn't take their power away. She traps them. She contains them. They've been contained before. They've escaped before. They could escape again. Because that is depression. That is mental illness. That is the battle. There isn't a cure for mental conditions. There's getting a handle on it and hoping that you keep it. And the integration of that into what we find out about Yaz's history, really well done, by the way, getting the flashback of her as a runaway and having an encounter with the policewoman and how meaningful that was. And then at the end, her going to see that woman to give her the 50 pence piece. I choked up at that. Mainly because of the other woman's reaction. Because Yaz knocks on the door and says, look, I'm sure you don't remember me. And just immediately, Yasmin Khan, of course I do. And when she sees the coin, she chokes up. And I choked up with her. And with Ryan and his friend, and Ryan recognizing that things weren't quite right with his friend, and his friend being very, look, no, it's fine. It's fine. I don't want to talk about it. It's fine. But Ryan being close enough with him that he is able to connect a little bit and pull him out of the cage that he made for himself and get him out to get help. This series is dealing with a lot of message episodes. Orphan 55 was a message episode. Praxeus was a message episode. This is a message episode. Of the ones we've had so far, this is by far the best one because actually they've gotten better every time. Whereas Orphan 55 was this clunky thing that beat you over the head with its message at the very friggin' end of the thing as opposed to having it woven across it. And Praxeus did it better by having it be a recurring thing that was going on across the episode. But even then it was like, oh, I mean, so that's pretty good. But here, it's not just about having the message occur across the story. It's about having the message feed the themes, and the themes help determine the way the story goes so that everything fits together. So that the themes work with the story, and the story enhances the themes, and the message of seeking help and of little things making the difference, of Ryan showing up with chips which gets his friend to open the door, to this woman just on this one day on the job talking to someone who's run away from home, just having a conversation, and it makes a difference because it can. It won't always. You can't save everyone. Some people don't want to be saved. Some people, they can't save themselves, with or without help. But if you try and if you reach out, like this woman did with Yaz, like Ryan does with his friend, like in a roundabout way Graham and the doctor do with each other, there is the chance at making that connection, of making that difference. And it doesn't suddenly mean everything's better, but turning things around starts with a single step in the right direction. And you can encourage and inspire people to take that first step in the direction they need to be in a better place. And what I mentioned with Graham and the doctor, Graham doesn't have anybody to talk to. So he talks to the doctor, and I actually feel like the doctor, in her very reserved way, kind of opened up a little to him about not being very good at this. And talking through something that she normally just would have done. Says, okay, so I'm going to stand over here, and I'm going to mess with some stuff at the TARDIS, and then I'm going to think of what I should have said a few minutes ago. All right? And I feel like that was her letting Graham in about as much as she probably is able and willing to let anyone in right now. I felt like I've learned more about the Doctor in the last couple episodes, this one especially, than I have in a while. This doctor, anyway, Whitaker's doctor. I'm starting to get her now, I think. And I'm really, really enjoying what I see. And especially here where it's fully integrated. She wants them there. She talks to them when they're not there and like berates herself for having a conversation and forgetting that they're not even there to hear her. But when they ask her questions, she doesn't want to answer them. She wants to be alone, and she also wants the company. And that's the battle that's happening for her. And there's a battle inside the heads of most of us. And if you didn't catch it, that's what the two planets that trapped these Eternals, that's what they were. It's the war that you have with yourself inside your own head, orchestrated by depression, by anxiety, by whatever is gnawing at you. Gets you to fight yourself in your own head, just sits back and laughs. But if you can have your moments of clarity, maybe on your own, maybe with professional help, maybe inspired by just a little thing that you have with someone, if you can have your moments of clarity where you can get whatever's going on in your head to stop fighting, then maybe you can contain what it is that's causing that battle. And maybe it'll break out again, but maybe you can contain it again when you need to. Maybe with help, maybe on your own, I don't know, but this was really good. I think this has a really good shot at being my new favorite episode of this era of Chibnall and Whitaker. I thought it was a good story, well told from a narrative perspective, and when you bring the thematic resonance to it, this was phenomenal. I loved this. Can You Hear Me? Also the perfect title for this thing. Because we always wonder, am I actually being heard? If you want to be heard, awkward segue, whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. You can support what I do on my Patreon page. There's a link in the description. There's the usual things like subscribe. They help me out. They help me keep growing the channel. You don't have to do any of it, though. I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I'll do my best to hear you. Because at the end of the day, you're the council. I'm just running meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned.